My name is Michael Rothman. I'm a medical doctor. I work here at Rahway Hospital in the emergency department. I'm board certified in emergency medicine and also board certified in internal medicine. I also have a practice in East Brunswick. It's called MDWellness and Aesthetics. And at that practice, I really try to help people with their physiology. Rather than treating diseases, which is where most of medicine's focused in on, I actually try to make the patient work on their health rather than try to fight diseases. So it's a different approach. And today I want to talk about exercise, because that's really part of your physiology, and proper exercise will make you healthier. Improper exercise can actually be very harmful. So we're going to talk about exercise myths, and I want to separate some facts from fiction. Everything that I'm telling you today I do have references for. I don't want to show you all the references because it can get a little dry. But if you want, at the end, I can show you some references. So, exercise myth number one, the best way to strengthen your heart and prevent heart disease is through aerobic exercise. Okay? Oh, go on the treadmill, go on the elliptical, go for a walk. This is actually not true. Okay? And that may sound funny, but this is actually a myth. The truth is that sprint interval training and weightlifting are actually superior to achieving cardiovascular health. This is a study. I have a bunch of studies talk about strength endurance training versus endurance training in congestive heart failure. Another article, high intensity aerobic interval exercise superior to moderate intensity exercise for increasing aerobic capacity in coronary artery disease. Conclusion here, high intensity aerobic interval training was superior to moderate exercise for increasing maximum oxygen utilization in stable heart patients. Another study, interval training versus continuous training after heart disease, heart surgery. Whoops, let me just back up here. So I have hundreds and hundreds of these articles, and they all basically say the same thing. Now, don't get me wrong. If you've had heart disease or if you're trying to avoid heart disease, exercise is helpful. But we all have just a limited amount of time to exercise. You want to do something that's just not better than nothing. You want to do something that's as advantageous as possible. And sprint interval training and weightlifting is actually much better for you than going on a treadmill and working out for 45 minutes or an hour. And I'm going to go into this in more detail as I go through some of these myths. So myth number two, if workouts are not giving us the results that we want, we must work out more. Okay? I did a half an hour on the treadmill, and I'm not losing weight, I still feel lousy, I better do an hour. An hour is twice as good as a half an hour. This is not true. I did 2 sets of weights, and my muscles are not getting any bigger. Let me do 3 or 4 sets of weights. This is not true. Okay? This is a myth. So actually increasing the volume of workouts causes overtraining syndrome. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. It's the intensity that you want to increase, not the volume, if you want to increase your results. Now, intensity takes effort, okay? Volume takes effort, but not as much. You know, I go to the gym and I see a lot of people, they're sitting on the bike and they're reading a magazine. They're sitting on the bike and watching television. They're on the treadmill having a conversation, okay? It's a low-intensity workout. You look at your watch, go, yeah, I got another 10 minutes to go, and then I'm done. Okay? This is exactly what you don't want to do, okay? It's not going to be as useful as you may think, and in the long term can actually not be good for you. So I have some studies here. They're talking about training and overtraining syndromes, and they actually tried to produce an overtraining syndrome in different people, in these experienced middle and long distance runners, and they found that it was very easily caused by increasing the volume. They kept increasing the volume, all of a sudden, boom, these people started to have symptoms, body aches, fatigue. Their performance was not as good. Other studies saying the same thing. Not only did they hurt themselves, the overtraining syndrome lasted months after the initial overtraining period. They had competitive and non-competitive runners. The next season, they could not even perform up to their normal standards because they had overtrained. Now here, they actually looked at training volume versus intensity. So one group of runners, they increased the volume, and the other group of runners, they increased the intensity. And what did they find? They found that there was a plateau in endurance performance and a decrease in maximum performance occurred during the increasing the training volume. TV is volume. Whereas intensity did not. Improvement in endurance and maximum performance occurred during increased training intensity, indicating a failure to cause an overtraining syndrome in increased training intensity. So when you study people and you do these experiments and you increase the volume, they have this what's called overtraining syndrome. If you increase the intensity, you're unable to actually cause this syndrome. So increasing the intensity without increasing the volume will not end up with overtraining. Anybody have any questions? Or
I'm confused what you're saying between intensity and volume. You mean by repetitions of something or putting more weights on something?
okay, let me just define that because I just want to make sure everybody's clear. So let's talk about running for a moment, okay? You could run for 15 minutes in a jog, or 20 minutes, or 30 minutes, or 40 minutes, or 45 minutes, or 2 hours. That's volume, okay? Or instead of doing 15 minutes of jogging, you can do a sprint as fast as you can for 30 seconds. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. It's called interval training. And then you take a little break, and then you sprint as fast as you can. And I'm not suggesting that everybody do this, by the way, but there are other ways that you can increase intensity. But when you increase the intensity, you don't end up with an overtraining syndrome. Now, the thing about the intensity is you can't do it for very long. I mean, how fast can you run as fast as you can? Well, not that long. It's going to be 30 seconds or 45 seconds. But when you do that, you tire very quickly, and then you take your break, and you do these things in cycles. When you do that, you will not overtrain, and you actually get a lot of benefits. In fact, the same benefits that you would get from the endurance training, if not better. Okay? Everybody clear on that? Yes. Low-intensity exercise burns glycogen, initially burns glycogen. Glycogen is a storage form of carbohydrate. You store it in your muscles. After about a half an hour, you'll burn up all your glycogen. Okay? So if you do go on the treadmill for a half an hour, you essentially burn up all the glycogen out of your muscles. You have not burned any fat whatsoever. So if you stop right then and there, you haven't burned any fat, but you will be very, very hungry. Okay? Have you ever noticed that? If you go on the treadmill, you are extraordinarily hungry when you're done? No? Okay? Some people have, I guess, right? So then what happens is you end up eating to replace what you just, burned up. Now, if you go longer than a half an hour, you will actually start to utilize other pathways. This is sort of oversimplified. You certainly do burn some fat, but most of it's glycogen. When you do high-intensity exercise, you burn the fat immediately from the beginning of the exercise, and you don't burn much glycogen. It's a different process. So consequently, when you do higher intensity stuff, you don't burn the glycogen, you burn fat more, and you will not be as hungry after your exercise. Believe me, if you do these sprint interval trainings, you don't want to eat for a while after you're done with these because your body's revved up. This talks about more training, overtraining. They talk about different hormone levels from overtraining. There's an exhaustion syndrome from interval training volume. It changes your metabolisms, and it releases something called catecholamines, which is like adrenaline. And there's an exhaustion syndrome. And the majority of athletes actually have this syndrome. So the studies show that increasing volume past a certain limit resulted in an overtraining syndrome, but increasing intensity did not produce an overtraining syndrome. There's all these different studies on how do we measure if you've been overtraining. Hormone levels change. Okay? There's a diminished performance, there's accelerated fatigability, and there's symptoms of stress. Hormone changes. Testosterone will go down, cortisol will go up. So the conclusion of some of these other studies were the frequency of training sessions with higher demand should be carefully limited in order to prevent overtraining syndrome.